Hey Lisa,
Hey Brian, how are you?
I'm doing well. How you doing?
Good, thank you. Are you able to hear me okay?
Yeah, I can hear you
Okay,
fine. I can hear you
great.
fine. I'm gonna make you a co-host, and then you should be able to share your screen,
Beautiful.
and then we'll start letting in the students.
All right,
What do you
let's
need from
do
me
it.
tonight? You feel ready? Got
I
questions?
am I am ready. I
Okay.
don't have any questions. So,
Okay.
well, actually I should ask you, do you do an intro to
Um,
kick it off or no?
Usually, like on Tuesday, I did an intro because it was Bob and he wasn't there at the first one. So since the
Okay.
students know you already, I'll probably just hand it over to you pretty quickly. We do have one
Okay.
new student named Princess. It looks like she's actually in the waiting room. She just registered today. So um,
Okay.
we've been emailing her, so I don't need to say anything, but just so you know, there'll be one extra person on the call.
That sounds good. And then is there any specific request for people to leave cameras on, or how have you been handling that?
Maybe I will make an announcement at the beginning. Yeah, we're trying to encourage that. I know
Okay.
a lot of people are, just on their dinner break or whatever, and then they turn them on a little bit later. So that could happen, but I'll make an announcement just kind of in general to have cameras on if they're able.
Okay. That sounds great. And then I assume you're just in the background. You're not really
Mhm.
monitoring what's going on other than just looking at it occasionally, right?
Yeah, I mean, I'll be looking at it, listening in the whole time. So if you need
Oh,
anything, you can just
okay.
type my name and I'm here. Otherwise, I'm just
Okay.
taking attendance and just, yeah, here for
Perfect.
support.
Okay, sounds good. Thanks.
Of course. All right, I will let them in. All right. Hello, everyone. We got Amber, Liz, Tyler, and I assume the P Diop is Princess. Welcome, Princess. Thanks for joining tonight. Lisa, do you know, is there going to be any interior lighting that you're finishing up tonight or?
Yes, there
Okay.
is interior lighting to finish up. So
Okay.
that's where we'll start.
Excellent. And actually, I don't know if could we do this quick screen share test, Lisa? I want to make sure that you can.
Oh, yeah, sure. Good idea.
When do you leave
Yep.
for your trip? Next week?
I leave on Tuesday.
Tuesday. All right.
See, there we go. All right. How's that looking?
Perfect. Visual
Okay,
experience. All right. Very
great.
good.
That's where we're starting. Yeah, lots on deck for a very short trip. Just,
Yeah.
but I'm excited about it. Yeah.
Very good. I wonder who that is. Who's 17857? Mystery number. Ah, hello.
Hi.
Oh, hi. Sorry,
Hey.
I'll write my name in here for us. I'm Hector.
Yeah, you're good. Thanks for joining, Hector. All right.
Well, my camera doesn't want to come for some reason. It says cannot start video. Okay. Well, select another video. What does it? Yeah, I'm sorry. I don't know, but my camera doesn't want to come. Maybe I should sign out and come back in.
Either way, yeah, you can try that. I don't know if that'll be any different than it is right now, but you can give it a try. There should be a little video icon at the bottom of your screen if you see
Yes,
that.
it's that video that is saying,
Oh,
fail to start the video camera. Please select the video camera in setting.
oh, okay. Maybe you have a couple hooked up and one of
Yeah,
them isn't working. If you
yeah.
click on the little arrow icon next to the camera symbol, it'll show you all the different cameras that you can select, and maybe there's another camera on your computer.
Maybe choose video. Just
If not, we can hear you at least, so that's good.
okay, so that's good. And I'm glad you explained. So I will, if it's not working, it's fine. If it's fine with you, yeah.
And did you get the email, Princess, from Chris earlier today?
Yes, I did.
Okay, great. Well, thanks for joining us tonight. Glad you can join us for the rest of the course.
Yeah, I'm so happy to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, we've had a lot of people from American Lighting the last few years. You all always have a good attendance. So thanks again.
You're welcome. Thanks.
Right. I think that's just about everyone. We might have one or two more coming, but I know a couple of people had emailed that they wouldn't be able to make it tonight. So we will go ahead and get started. Welcome everyone. Happy Thursday. This is almost the end of week 2 of FOL, just one more week to go. Lisa's going to be joining us again tonight. You all were with Lisa that first night when we were in person for what, maybe like 60 or 70% of the interior lighting you got through?
Yeah, I think that's about right.
Yeah. So Lisa's going to be wrapping up interior lighting and then moving on into exterior lighting tonight. So it should be a very good session. I'm excited for this one. Kind of general announcements again. I understand that it's dinner hour, and if people are eating dinner and don't want to show their faces on camera, that's fine. But I do encourage you all to turn on your cameras at some point tonight. It just helps a little bit with the engagement and letting Lisa know that you're all attentive and asking good questions and things like that. Just a reminder, I've been sending out the YouTube links for the sessions so far. Hopefully everyone's been receiving those. I'll be sending out this one before the weekend. So if you have missed any sessions, make sure that you're staying caught up with the rest of the class. And then we will see you all back for another virtual session next Tuesday at 5:30. So 2 more virtual sessions next Tuesday and Thursday. And then a week from this coming Saturday is our final sprint finish, which is it might not be the full 6 hours, but it's going to be basically all morning on April 12th, that Saturday. Any questions about the course so far or about what's to come? All right. Lisa, I will hand it off to you then.
Sounds great. Thanks a lot, Brian. So welcome back. It's nice to see you all again or see your names, and just echoing what Brian said, it's great for all of us if and when you're able to turn on your camera if you do. And certainly if you're eating, don't feel compelled. That's one of my pet peeves. I hate having the camera on when I'm eating. Also, it looks like everybody is muted, and thank you for that. But this is informal and it's intended to be engaging and interactive. So in the middle of things, if you have a question, feel free to either raise your hand in the Zoom function or just chime in and we'll chat about whatever is on your mind. So we are going to begin tonight with the wrap up of the interior lighting module that we began last Thursday. And I'm glad we're remote. I don't know about you, but I'm looking outside and that's pretty heavy snow coming down. So I'm glad none of us had to get in a car and drive to a class tonight. That's a good benefit. We're going to take a break after that. I'm targeting maybe about 45 minutes to finish up the interior lighting module, give or take. We'll take a break. So in case you're kind of anticipating when are we going to have a break, we'll do it after that, take a stretch, and then we'll jump into the exterior lighting module. A lot of really good, juicy content tonight. So we're jumping right in where we left off last week. And if you weren't able to make it, please review the slideshow and the notes that came as a follow-up to this, but we're going to jump in and talk about visual experience. As we're thinking about the visual experience, one of the things that we're asked to do many times through early stages of lighting design is to consider illuminance levels. And horizontal surfaces are the places that we think about lighting most frequently because many tasks occur on the horizontal surface. So who has anybody been running foot candle, running illuminance calculations? I see some yeses. Yep, awesome. So I like to jokingly call these fruit candles because there is so much about context and adaptation that really changes the way lighting looks. Like if you were in the room with us last week, we handed around the illuminance meter, and frankly, 25 foot candles seemed pretty darn bright in that space. It was after dark. And even when we turned the lights up to more full output and got 80 foot candles, I know all of us were sort of reeling. So horizontal luminance, these levels are certainly something that is worth calculating, and we have to know this, especially for tasks. But that's not the whole story. So one of the things that is equally important, and in my mind, even more important, is lighting on a vertical surface. Last week when we were lighting up the walls, and if you recall, we were doing the test of the wall wash distribution that was slightly softer, sort of smoothed out the masonry a little bit versus the grays that had that really sharp rake of light that really popped out the texture. Both of those were providing vertical illuminance. And our eyes do perceive light on vertical surfaces first, because what did we evolve doing? Looking out and scanning at the horizon light, looking for game, looking for whatever food we could collect, looking for something that we wanted to run and avoid. So that's what tells our eyes that it's brightest first, is what's on a vertical surface. So there are some instances where the IES very carefully defines vertical illuminance, and this slide gives us some great instances of that. Bathroom lighting for task, for managing shaving, makeup, etc., is hugely, hugely important. And in these instances where we are addressing a task like this, we want to make sure that we have good uniformity. So I'm going to ask a question. Does anybody know the difference between illuminance and luminance? Okay, I see some, some looks of like, it's right there. I know it, it's right there. How quickly can I send this to ChatGPT? So if you think about illuminance, ill is a Latin preposition that means on. So just think about light on a surface. Illuminance is the lighting that's incident that we're measuring on that surface. Luminance is the measurement of brightness on the object that itself is providing the light. So if you have like I've got this rather bright, oh, well, my background doesn't help, but I have a parchment shade lamp that has a relatively bright shade. Places where there are linear lenses where you look up and you see sort of brightness on the lens, that is luminance. And we'll talk about that a little bit when we talk about contrast, but I wanted to make sure to define those two terms. So one of the best ways to sound like you know what you're talking about in lighting is if you speak about illuminance for foot candles and incident lighting. If you do talk about luminance when you mean foot candles, if you're around people who know lighting, they're going to kind of give you the stink eye. So just so you can look like you know what you're talking about. Come on, PowerPoint, you can do it. There we go. All right. Last week I had wanted to mock some things up, but this is something that you can do really readily at home. Next time that you have a magazine, if you have one at home, if you can grab one, hopefully it's nice and glossy. Take it and take your cell phone flashlight and just do a demo where you turn on that flashlight. I'm going to turn mine on, turn on the flashlight and aim it at the magazine. Now, who's played pool? Has anybody played pool? Good at bank shots. Yes, I see some. Yeah, why am I not surprised? I thought this might be a crew that would know the old angle of incidence equals angle of reflection rule that is best learned through playing pool. Same thing applies to lighting. So the angle of incidence is the angle of reflection. So the exact same thing you're using for bank shots is exactly what we use to think about the way that lighting is reflected off of surfaces. When we have a glossy surface or a light colored surface, if we have light that is, and hopefully you can see my mouse, that is bouncing off of a bright surface and into the eyes, that's going to be really uncomfortable. You can test that yourself by holding your cell phone at different angles and seeing where you get that reflection off of a magazine. I encourage doing this because anytime that we're lighting task surfaces, we need to think about that angle of incidence equals angle of reflection. And it's not just into people's eyes, it's to computer screens as well. Thankfully, our monitors are way better at making sure that they don't pick up the direct reflections of light, but we want to be thoughtful. Like, you're not going to put an adjustable accent over someone's head back behind them where it shoots onto a keyboard and then onto a monitor, nor are you going to put it right in front of them where it shoots off of a desk and into the eyes. Best position is on the sides for that. So we want to think about that geometry of where our sources are reflecting, not just how they might enter the eye, like if you see a bright light in your field of vision, but thinking about those reflections as well. Now, who can tell me what the exception to this might be in terms of a desk or a horizontal surface finish, hue, or material? What if it's really dark? If it's a really dark color, it's going to absorb that light and it's not really going to bounce. Also, if it's a really uneven surface, so the more specular or reflective it is, the more this is a concern. That's why I suggest you mock it up with a magazine. If it's like a really textured material, like a heavily honed stone, that also is actually going to act as a diffuser that's going to scatter the light in different directions. So we have less of a concern then. Those aren't necessarily the most common applications in office environments. Some desks are black, but we more typically see something that's a little lighter in color. Now we get into the meat of it. Last week, I issued the invitation to study the IES, either the Illuminance Selector online, or if you have the handbook, to go ahead and, which would be 10th edition, which would, if you're lifting it, you don't have to go to the gym because it's fat and heavy. But there are illuminance tables. Did anybody have a chance to look at these, or has anyone done that as part of their daily course of work? Cool. It's an awesome introduction. And for those of you, I'm going to pull a screen over. If you have access to the IES lighting library, this is the illuminance selector. There is actually an illuminance selector function. So if your firm has a membership to this, then you can go in and actually search these charts online. And it's frankly fabulous. It's such an improvement over having tried to find those things digging through the handbook, whether physically or electronically. But let's break this down. This is really important to know. These, first of all, I want to highlight that these are recommendations and guidelines. These are not codes. These are not standards. There is no immediate and direct legal implication like there is with path of egress lighting if you do not provide these light levels. All of these, there's a precedent in all of these where it says these need to be evaluated specific to the project, to the user group, the context, the usage, the energy. So always a guideline and a starting point, not a rigid code. So this is actually simpler than it looks like. The first thing that we're going to look at is, all right, let's look at, all right, maybe television viewing. Let's check that out. What are we going to do if we're viewing television? So first of all, by the way, that veil risk, high, medium, low, there isn't something here because this isn't like a task surface in an office, but that's exactly what that last slide was, that veiling reflection business. So they're actually telling us whether it is, that's a consideration. These guys just FYI, in older versions, most of these are in lux. So lux is the metric version of foot candles. And while not exact, because it's the same incident amount of light on 1 square meter as opposed to 1 square foot, the rough rule of thumb is you divide lux by 10 and you get foot candles. It's a little bit off, but it's close enough that that's widely accepted practice. There are in the illuminance selector, you can just go up and toggle metric versus imperial measurements at the top. Make sure you know whether it's foot candles or lux, because especially in some outdoor areas where light levels that are recommended are extremely low, they might be recommending 2 lux and you're like, cool, 2 foot candles. No, not cool. It's 0.2 foot candles if it's 2 lux. So this is telling us that this is foot candles, and that horizontal measurement is just telling us, hey, you want 3 foot candles at 4 feet horizontal. So basically, I'm not sure why you need 3 foot candles at 4 feet to watch TV. Probably we're more interested in what's happening on the vertical surface, and we want that to be relatively low. But they're suggesting that that target is an average. Some of them are a max, some of them are a min, and some are an average. So you just want to know what you're dealing with. This is our uniformity ratio. And in the world of lighting, when we are trying to create visual comfort and we're trying to deliver good lighting in task areas, we certainly can have a very focused area for task lighting. But if we're talking about, for instance, a whole office, or we're talking about a parking lot, uniformity is the single most important element that we want to deliver for that task lighting. Now, if we're in a hotel and we want drama and we want to drive focus to certain elements, like we were punching the flowers last week with that little flashlight and playing with beam spreads, we're in retail. We want contrast. We want high contrast. And what does that mean for uniformity? When contrast goes up, what happens to uniformity? It goes down. Yep, I'm seeing some thumbs down, which is thumbs up on the thumbs down. So this is important to know. This is a pretty high level of uniformity, and that uniformity is average to minimum. So when you're running calcs, you know that you can pull statistical areas that have max to min, average to min, have max to average. This is giving us how we would run those photometrics. Same thing applies for vertical. The concept is the same. We're just taking it to this surface and it's giving us the height where we're measuring that. So we're measuring it at 4 feet. And it's interesting that the uniformity and the average to min are exactly the same, which frankly makes total sense for television viewing. We don't have a horizontal task. We don't want a lot of light. We don't want a lot of light on the vertical surface because the TV is providing that, maybe just enough that we don't have super high contrast, a bright screen, dark wall. So that's how we read the chart. Is everybody following that? So far, so good? Okay, awesome. So next is your turn. Let's cruise over to an example. Let's take a look at a library. Let's take a look at the general book stack. Actually, let's go down to shelving. We're going to go down to shelving. That sounds kind of interesting. All right, so who can tell me what our light level is and at what height for the horizontal surface when we are at shelving?
About 3 foot candles at 3 feet.
Good try. If this was metric and this was lux, you would be correct. This one is in foot candles, and you've probably seen this chart previously in lux, and so that's I have to check myself on that too. So 30 foot candles, you are correct with 3 feet. How about for the vertical surface for bookshelves? What's our target illuminance level and at what height? It's a little tricky because it says TS, right? Like, what the heck is TS? That's the task surface. It's basically saying you got to have 20 foot candles up and down that whole shelf, man. You got to read the titles, the book spines at the bottom of the shelf, as well as the book spines at the top of the shelf. So what does that mean when you're doing that lighting layout and doing those photometrics? You got to look at what's at the bottom, because that's where you're going to have the most light fall off. So if you can hit your 20 foot candles down there, you're going to be golden. And then they give us our uniformity ratios here. So they're telling us in this instance, they're giving us all the things, because if you're going to smack with really high output, you have a fixture that doesn't have good distribution and you're going for that 20-foot candles at the bottom, I guarantee you're going to have more than an 8-to-1 max to min. You might have like 200 and have a 10-to-1 max to min, and that's not within the recommendations. So this one is a little bit tricky. Does this make sense to everybody, the way that these numbers are utilized and what that's going to mean in photometrics? Seeing some blank stares, so let me ask that another way. Are there any questions about this? I know it takes a minute to absorb it. Okay, these are really great. I suggest checking in with your firm if you have a lighting library subscription and can log in and check that out. The Illuminance selector, just to show you that one more time, I had just pulled up, there are a few starter menus on that, but you can just search a keyword, which I find is actually the easiest way to do it. And here is where you can choose metric versus, I guess USCF maybe is a new term for imperial. But in this, I was looking at, all right, well, what about in a conference room? What do we want to have for like a vertical illuminance in a conference room? 20-foot candles on a wall. That's a decent amount of light on a wall. So this is super helpful. We pull these up all the time and go back and refer to them when we're doing lighting design. All right, we will keep moving here.
Lisa, can I ask a question really quick?
Absolutely.
If you go back, so sorry if you already said this and I missed it, but so this 8-to-2-to-1 max average minimum, that 8 value is the foot candle, or that's the highest foot candle, or that's just a ratio?
It's just a ratio. So if we look at the number, which is 20-foot candles, which is the target, that's going to be our average. So if we have 20-foot candles average and we've got an 8-to-2-to-1, then the 2 is our 20. So an X10, or excuse me, X4. Wait a minute, what am I doing? 20. So double that. We want 10-foot candles minimum and 4X 80, no, 100 and you guys, my brain is a little bit of mush here. 80-foot candles, right? Have I multiplied that right? Brian, you're probably laughing at me right now.
Out.
I think it's
No,
160. It's 160, right?
It'd be 80, 20.
80, 20, 10. Okay, thank you. Yeah, so that's it's really just the ratio. So if we take it, and it's a little easier to look at this one, when we've got 20-foot candles average, 2-to-1, average to min, that means, hey, hit an average of 20, but make sure you've got at least 10. So that's how we do that ratio. Does that make sense, Madison?
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. It's easier when you apply it, and I think in running photometrics, whether you're in AGI or in Dialux, I'm pretty sure that you can pull out the ratios in that if you need to. Thanks for asking that.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. Yeah, it's a good practical application one. I would suggest just taking a look at some of those and internalizing some of those numbers. And then actually one other thing that's really useful, so just talking about ways to improve your own understanding and knowledge of lighting. If you can borrow an illuminance meter, so a foot candle meter or lux meter, depending on the units. If you can borrow one from your company and carry it around for a week, just measure everything you can, horizontal, vertical, day, evening, night, something that feels comfortable, something that feels uncomfortable. You'll really start to internalize what these different foot candle levels mean. And you'll also really understand that 20-foot candles is not 20-foot candles is not 20-foot candles. 20-foot candles, if you're sitting next to a bright window, is nothing. It's irrelevant. 20-foot candles, if it's the middle of the night, is enough to blind you. And then we have a whole spectrum in between. So internalizing the way that foot candles, our illuminance measurements, are perceived and how comfortable or uncomfortable they are at different times of day and night is hugely helpful. So big tip, I've done that. I did that when I started my lighting career and my mind was blown. So now I like to make bets with people. I'm like, do you want to bet on the foot candle levels? And And sometimes I'm really, really far off, but more often than not, I'm in the ballpark. So you too could become the expert and start winning lots of bets. So side hustle. All right, we did talk a little bit about glare. Look at this. Here's the magazine. So that's where I would say try that mock-up, and you can certainly do it with a flashlight, with your phone. If you have a luminaire in your office that you can plug in that's even higher output, you'll get a really, really clear view of that. So we want to be careful about glare in the internal environment. Sometimes there's glare that is harder for us to control in our world of electric lighting, but shades are a really critical component. It's helpful to know in any space where you're working on the lighting, if there are windows, understanding the floor height or the sill height, the head height, and is there any kind of shading associated with those? I guarantee you, if it's a conference room and there is not shading, you need a lot more light in that conference room to balance out the daylight that is coming in. Otherwise, you'll end the camera, especially if there's camera capture. The camera is actually going to daylight adapt to that bright window, which means that everybody in the room starts to look like they've got this really weird orange skin tone. So very important to understand what's going on, not just from the standpoint of glare, but from the standpoint of understanding how our electric lighting may need to adapt. These are some of the most egregious things out there in terms of glare. And the great irony is that if you ran foot candles for this, you'd be like, I am so smart. This is like baby's butt smooth on that ground. I've got the most awesome lighting solution. And I have seen so much of that in my career where people are like, oh, the light is great. We've got great photometrics. And I look at the luminaire and my question is, well, how comfortable or uncomfortable is that going to be when you have a dark adapted eye? So please do not lose sight of the visual comfort or discomfort associated with a luminaire by way of glare, just because you've got this awesome set of photometrics on the ground. Because remember, hopefully we're not just looking at the ground when we're walking around. Eyes are up. So think about what's in that field of vision. Transient adaptation. Okay, who works in Rhino? Who has an office in Rhino, or who lives in Rhino or spends lots of time in Rhino? Anybody? Okay, well, I'm going to give you a field trip to try. And if you're out and about, it's right across from Bierstadt Brewing. It's on Blake. It's at 28th and Blake. There's a multifamily project there. And they have a parking garage entrance, and the parking garage entrance slopes like this, and they have big surface disc lights on that parking lot, on the parking garage entrance. Those lights are off during the day and on at night, and they put out a lot of light. Who knows what's wrong with this picture? Off during the day, on at night, because that's kind of what you normally want to do with lighting, right? If there's enough daylight, you want the lights off, and then it's after dark, you want them on. Why would it be different in this environment?
I feel like it's dangerous, like to go from it being super bright to super dark. So there should be kind of, like you said on the slide right here, like there needs to be a transition when you're like going into a space, because especially when you're driving a car, like that's just dangerous.
Yeah, great input, Madison. All right, so here's the deal. Full moon, 0.02 foot candles, 0.02. Full daylight, yeah, about 10,000, 0.02 to 10,000. That's an enormous range, and our eyes adapt beautifully to that full range. During the day, when our eyes are adapted to potentially up to 10,000 foot candles, and the average recommended illuminance level in parking garages is about 5 foot candles, you can't go from 10,000 foot candles to 5 like this. Your eyes need a transition range. And so this idea of transient adaptation is just a way of saying that when you're moving from a really bright environment to a relatively darker environment, or from the same applies when we might have that If there's street lighting, maybe we have 1 foot candle, but we might only have 0.1 foot candles outside. And then we're going to 5 foot candles in the parking garage after dark. That likewise is a huge swing. So what we want is during the day, those lights are on full bright. In that first 50 feet, as our eyes transition, we want 50-foot candles. But we sure as heck don't want to go from 0.1 foot candles to 50-foot candles to 5-foot candles at night. So those lights need to be down somewhere in that 1 to 2, maybe 3-foot candle range to bring you from the dark environment into the relatively brighter parking garage environment after dark. And what happened at that project is that the controls were commissioned opposite. They were commissioned like they were interior daylighting, like, oh, I see plenty of daylight, I'm turning off, yo, I'm saving energy. And then after dark is like, oh, there's no daylight, I'm going to be on, I'm going to give you 50-foot candles. And this is not behind a gate or a door. This is just shooting out on the sidewalk. So I invite you to have a little meander. It's right at the corner of 29th and Blake is where the parking garage is, and you will know it when you see it. So don't make that mistake. If you're responsible for doing the photometrics for a transition for a parking garage, make sure that you're also really, really seeing about the controls as well to make sure that those are commissioned with the proper sequence of operations. So this applies, I'm giving the parking garage example because it's a really egregious one and it's done incorrectly a lot of times. And most people don't understand it. However, it's equally important if people are coming from like a bright daylight environment into sort of this more nuanced interior low light space. Or it's dark out and someone's walking into a really bright environment. We want to think about that transition space. Vestibules are really helpful for that. So transitions take time, and the older we get, the slower our eyes transition. One of the many indignities of aging. All right, we're going to keep cruising. As you can tell, I can yak about this stuff at length because it is so fascinating. Luminance and luminance ratios. Okay, we already talked about luminance, so you guys actually have the clue of what that is. Luminance is the brightness that we see. It's that surface that is emitting light. So whether it's a lens or it's a shade or it's a lamp that is visible or it's actually a source inside, the luminance is that bright light emitting surface. And then on the table, we have the illuminance. That's the lighting on the surface. So the luminance ratios are super important when we talk, especially like think about a computer monitor. You guys are going to get this in a heartbeat. If your computer monitor is superimposed, or you have a screen, you've got your tablet or your phone, and you've got a really, really bright window in the background, and you're trying to see your screen, and the background is super bright, or even if you're just trying to look at your phone out in bright daylight, you've got to raise the brightness, right? So that's the exact same thing we have to think about when we're doing lighting. We need to almost think in the same kind of vocabulary. You want to either lower the shades on that window so we don't have as much luminance, because the bright window surface is actually, that's measured in luminance, or you want to brighten the output of what you're looking at. So brighten your screen. Those things are really, really important. And especially if we're doing any daylighting, the brightness on those, whether it's a skylight with film on it or it's a window, we want to be aware of luminance. Can anybody else think of a place in the nighttime environment where luminance is a problem? And I'm going to give you a hint. There's quite a compelling example as you're driving on Spear past the DCPA. You guys know the big internally, like the internally illuminated sign that's like the big screen it's by the DCPA, and it's like coming soon, and or the furniture stores that are like in Commerce City, and you drive by and you're just freaking blinded when you're driving by at night because those signs are so bright. That is because the luminance is too high. They've set the luminance, just kind of like your phone screen, for daylight levels. So they have it, that's measured in nits, which some of your other instructors have probably talked about that or will, but that luminance level is actually something that we have to think about. It's part of the well building standard, by the way, because that contributes to light pollution in the night sky, which we'll talk about in the exterior lighting module. So thinking about that for interiors, we just want to be careful when we're considering, especially in senior living environments, bright surfaces like this that have high luminance, really, really, really bright visible lamps, a really, really, really bright small shade. That's very problematic for senior eyes because they can't adapt as well. And it's uncomfortable for everybody, but especially problematic the older the population. The other ratio here that you'll learn about is that the smaller the surface, the higher the luminance. So it's an exponential equation. So architects, and I get to say this with love because I am an architect. Architects love having really super sleek, skinny lensed fixtures, and now we can push 1,000 lumens a foot out of those bad boys, no problem. We can give you that. We can give you all the light you need from a 1-inch lensed fixture. Well, guess what? The luminance on that lens when it's 1 inch wide is something like 10x the luminance when it's 2 inches wide. So it's an exponential relationship. It's really uncomfortable. So if you are seen or you're being asked to consider really narrow lensed fixtures, be very, very careful about where they are in the field of vision and be very, very cautious about how much light you push out of those. I had to have that conversation with lots of architects before. Sometimes I win, sometimes I don't. Anyway, there is also glare shielding and cutoff with sources. And when we're talking about a cutoff angle, this really just means that it's the angle you like this tells it all, right? From nadir, the lower that angle, the more that you're comfortable, you don't see the light inside the light source. And then the shielding angle, it's just that's from horizontal. So it's just the difference from horizontal and vertical. And we've all seen downlights where they've got a lens just right at the ceiling, and that thing is there's no comfort. You're seeing that bright surface from anywhere in that room. When we have a recessed source, we have got a much better cutoff, and that way we're seeing less of that source. So when considering luminaires, think about the environment. You want to think about the shielding angle and the glare, because if it's something that it has really high visual sensitivity, you want to make sure that that source is pulled back. And that's why puck lights that people are like, oh, it's a downlight. Well, it is taking a downlight, but it's just smacking that high luminance surface on the ceiling, and that's not really visually comfortable. All right. Unified glare rating is thankfully something that we're hearing about more and more in the world of lighting. Europe has instituted this standard, and this is actually it's a measurement that is used to indicate the level of glare in a fixture. However, there is no universal UGR for a luminaire. It always is a measurement that is based on the mounting height combined with the viewing angle to the luminaire. So while there might be some average scenarios where a manufacturer says, hey, in this application, when you have it at 10 feet and you're at 45-degree viewing angle, like you're at a desk, kind of, and it's a few feet in front of you, here's the UGR rating. But it's never universal. So just know that there's no one size fits all UGR. It's always an equation that is based on mounting height and viewing angle. Does anybody know the magic UGR number that is kind of considered the accepted standard for, wow, that's really low glare and it's going to be really comfortable?
For some reason, I feel like it's 17.
Super close. It's 19. And that is what shows up in the well building standard. It's actually in the electric light glare control portion of the standard. And so you can do a lot of complicated measurements, which frankly are really, really difficult to do and take an enormous amount of time. Or if you can prove that there's a UGR of 19 or less, then you can tick the box on this particular this particular component in the well building standard. Again, keep in mind, it's not universal. It has to be calculated based on the mounting height of the fixture and the viewing angle. But UGR of 19 is a really comfortable glare rating for offices. Anything below 10 is like an incredible slam dunk, and below 5, it's sort of like, well, there's just like, why are we even talking about it? Higher than 30 is unacceptable. So if below 10 is a win and above 30 is unacceptable, a UGR of 19 is just slightly below the midline. So I would just keep your ears out for that and take a look at luminaires that do feature an average UGR 19 rating. It's pretty compelling, that story, and we're doing a lot better now in general about paying attention to glare and less about the how many lumens per watt can we push out at the sacrifice of visual comfort. We can't sacrifice efficiency and create a huge amount of glare along the way. That actually can cause migraines. So definitely not a winning situation. All right, we did talk about contrast last week, and if you guys remember, I had mentioned that in lighting for retail, you want to make sure that you've got a 10-to-1 ratio. So again, going back, this is not a 10-foot candles and 1-foot candle. It's just a ratio. If you've got 100-foot candles on the sweaters, you want to make sure that what surrounds those is about 10-foot candles, so the sweaters really pop. The more precious the materials, so crystal and jewelry, so fine material highlighting or artwork, really small items, we actually want an even higher ratio if possible. And it's got to be at least 3-to-1 to catch our eyes. That's actually still relatively uniform in the grand scheme of things. So I wouldn't do retail where we are anywhere less than 5-to-1, and that 10-to-1 is really where we like to start. It's gonna actually draw people's attention. It's gonna help with wayfinding. The old department store methodology was like basically creating higher levels of illumination all along that path. So you have to walk past all the displays. There's no easy way to circulate from one place to another without walking past all the merchandise. And the lighting really helps with that. All right. Yes, here we go. I wasn't sure if I skipped a bunch of slides, but we are cruising on. We are moving past visual experience. We're going to talk briefly about light and architecture and also a little bit about wellness and sustainability, and then we'll be pretty close to the end of interior lighting. This was the first slide we looked at last week, and it's important to bring it up again. Lighting quality is not just a function of the task requirements or human needs. It's not just a function of the visuals and the architecture. It's not just a function of energy efficiency. It's all three. And it's where we meet in the middle in that Venn diagram that we really have the best lighting outcomes. So when we look at lighting in architectural spaces, some of the things that we want to be thinking about are how are we going to integrate lighting? Can we do that in clever ways? This was a heavily detailed cove light that was illuminating a ceiling. This was for a senior living environment, and we wanted to make sure that we had bright ceilings, but we didn't want any visibility of the sources. Similarly here, we wanted to graze down these gorgeous travertine walls, and it took a lot of detail coordination to get that light into that pocket, where from very long distant viewing angles, and those are up high, we wouldn't be able to see that source. Those things took a lot of coordination with the architecture. You can see some other examples in these images. So we want to be very clever in thinking about ways that we can integrate the lighting within the architecture, whether it's an uplight and we're coordinating structurally. This is at the Four Seasons in Lower Manhattan, and we designed these really interesting custom luminaires that define very small changes in ceiling height. We also can use our lighting not just to be hidden in the architecture, but in this instance, we were accentuating. Jabu Puchelberg wanted to have these very small, subtle changes in ceiling height in the lobby, and we actually took the luminaire and created forms that emphasized that, just sort of punctuated it. So we can do both. So question for you guys. As you're thinking about lighting, if you've been asked to design lighting or come up with solutions or run foot candles in a space, how are you thinking about things like ceilings and graphics and materials? How is that registering for you? Do you like to think about maybe illuminating ceilings when there's something really soaring like this or this space, doing uplight, kind of emphasizing the architecture, or maybe highlighting graphics that help with wayfinding and visual interest? We want to think about all of those things and think three-dimensionally. And the more that we have drawing instruments that can help tell the story so we understand what's happening in the space, the better. One thing I did want to point out, when running photometrics, one of the things that I've seen a lot, and it's really very impactful in our experience in the space. So this isn't just about photometrics, it's really about thinking about the lighting and then being sure that the lighting that is in a space works, is the reflectances in the space. So here, this was pretty simple. AGI gives you an 80 to 80% just out of the box baked in reflectivity for ceilings. I think it's 50% on walls and 20% on floors. This was actually about 90% on the ceiling. These walls, depending on where they are, that's a little darker than 50% and that's a little lighter, but somewhere in there. This floor is probably like 25%. This one is higher, but those numbers out of the box would have worked. What about here? Would those numbers have worked here? Absolutely not. I mean, we've got like maybe an average of 15 to 20% reflectivity on the ceiling. Yeah, our walls might be 50%, and yeah, our floor might be around 20, but that ceiling is we'd be really far off. And so we want to be thinking about those reflectances. And the darker the reflectances are, the more we actually have to overshoot the mark in terms of the light levels that are delivered, not just because that's absorbing the light, but because the whole space is going to read darker to the eye. So sometimes when we design space, like I did this for a corridor in a multifamily building, and every single surface was charcoal. And that was a late change after all the lighting had been designed. So it turns out when we went and took all the foot candle measurements, because the client wasn't happy, when we took all the measurements, they were all on the money, right in the heart of the IES recommendations. Maybe a little on the low side, but right in the money. But the perception in the space was that it was so dark that we actually needed more light than the recommended levels to help it feel brighter. Or if there had been some lighter elements in the space, that would have been a really helpful balance. So when we're thinking about the architecture and thinking about design features, we want to think about opportunities. We also want to pay very, very close attention to the hue of the materials on those surfaces so that we are considering not just photometrics, but the perception in the space. All right, wellness and sustainability. We touched on this just briefly last week, but circadian lighting, or lighting to support the circadian system, whether it is the actual neurological effects of that or psychological, we just understand that time is passing. There's a lot more attention to that's been happening in the world of lighting. Has anybody seen any presentations on circadian lighting or dug into that? Is anybody excited about that topic?
Chris
Yeah.
kind of did a little bit of that. Was that last week? Yeah, it must have been maybe last Thursday.
Did Chris talk about that, or was it 2 weeks? Maybe it was 2 weeks ago. Was it 2 weeks ago I saw you guys? I can't remember. Time flies. Time flies when you're having fun. Clearly we're having fun.
Last week sometime, yeah.
Last week. All right. Well, good. I'm glad that you had an introduction to this. This is something that I find really fascinating and quite motivating. The IES has categorized some things for us to help us understand what does impact circadian rhythms. And there is an entire, I can't remember if it's not an RP. There's a new RP that's out that addresses this, but there's a white paper that it was like watching paint dry to read it. And I have a pretty high appetite for understanding what's happening with the circadian system. But one of the things that came out of that, and it was over 10 years ago, was the definition of these 5 things. There are actually 6, but 5 understood and accepted things that really impact the circadian system. So first is quantity of light. So our adaptation to day and night, to sleep and wake cycles, and all kinds of other things that are driven by that cascade, which includes hunger, alertness, sex drive, many, many things. The first thing, this is the most important and the most obvious, is the quantity of light at the eye, or dosage, if you're thinking in medical terms. But it's not just the quantity of light, because we could have light that doesn't have any part of the spectrum that does give our bodies the circadian cues or the circadian stimulus. So the spectrum, 480 to 490 nanometers, is the action spectrum. That's what's really important. And it's important to know that a lot of our LED lighting, I had mentioned last week that there's a lot of kind of trash light in the 450 nanometer area that can create or contribute to retinal damage. It's not really providing a circadian stimulus. So we have to look at spectral distribution charts if we're going to be really accurate about how much effect something is going to have on the circadian system. So spectrum is super important. It's in the sky blue range that we're looking for that. That's that 480 to 490 nanometers. The third thing that's hugely important is the direction. That light, so our IPRGCs, which are the intrinsically photosensitive retinal ganglion cells that receive that stimulus and broadcast it to the suprachiasmatic nucleus in the brain, which is our master timekeeper. Those iPRGCs, which are 10% of our retinal ganglion cells, live in the lower back part of our retinas. So that's where daylight would strike our eyes. So there are some devices, like I actually have a lamp in my desk lamp that I need to remember to turn down, because it does have it's got the circadian action spectrum in it, and it's very effective. But if you see stuff that just like sits on at someone's desk below their eyes and is entering their eyes like this, it's not highly effective because it's not hitting those IPRGCs. And that's why direction is really important. If we're talking about doing this in a built environment, we do want to be thoughtful about that distribution. And by corollary, the inverse is true. So if we want to make sure that we have spaces that are friendly after dark, that are more friendly to our circadian system and aren't going to be providing that, hey, it's daytime, let's go, produce cortisol, yay, let's be awake stimulus, like we want to be tuning it down, those light levels being below the horizon, that works in our benefit because, hey, even if there's something there, it's not hitting the right part of our eyes. So the direction's hugely important, both for the daytime stimulus, the positive aspect, or the contributing additive aspect, and the subtractive aspect after dark. Duration is hugely important. There is debate in the literature about not only the dosage or quantity, but also duration that is impactful, especially after dark. But there is an accepted report that was, I think, released by NASA in their findings of design for either space stations, or I believe this was actually up for the space shuttle. It was for astronauts, that 1 minute of brighter light at the eye in the middle of the night is enough to completely suppress melatonin and disrupt sleep cycles. So we want to be thoughtful about that. Time of day, last one that's here, is super important because we want all that bright light if we have a normal diurnal cycle, awake during the day, asleep at night. We want all that bright light during the day, and we want not all the bright light. We want it to be lower, warmer, and lower on the horizon. So low color temperature, low height, and low level. The low is the rule for after dark. So time of day really matters. So it's circadian lighting is, there's no one size fits all circadian lighting. You have to think about both the additive and the subtractive. So that was a super duper crash course on that. There are a ton of resources out there about circadian lighting. And I think someone who's really done a great job with research and is highly knowledgeable and delivers information in a way that's both scientific and accurate, but very understandable is Robert Soler. He's with BIOS Lighting. So if you take a peek at any of their literature or you happen to be able to attend one of his talks, highly recommend it. I've had the pleasure of speaking with him a couple of times at national conferences, and I learn a ton from him. So anyway, and I'm passionate about this. If you're like really intrigued about that, hit me up and I can share some resources with you. All right, but that's all the time we have for that quick little touch in on circadian lighting. Wellness, so lighting for wellness and sustainability as a whole, one of the most important things is to think holistically. So it's not just about what we're doing with electric lighting. We also want to be cognizant of views, of daylight. We have to think about visual comfort. And so, like, yeah, you can deliver a fabulous amount of foot candles, but if you've done it with a lot of glare, now we have removed the wellness and sustainability component of lighting. And by the way, our eyes really like variation. So these even blankets of light and all the environments, it's not really what our eyes love. They love variation. And so having some integration of that is really a biophilic gesture. It's not, you don't want variation on someone's desk. That's not great. But if you think about that somewhere in an environment where someone can look up and see visual variation, it's really helpful. So when we're lighting sustainably, certainly it's not just about the energy. I think we've all become pretty savvy about lumens per watt, which we continue to kind of move that theoretical max up. Now we need to be thinking much more about the human experience. We need to think very much about the materials in luminaires, and we need to think about the durability of the installed lighting system. LEDs have been around long enough that we're starting to see broader wide scale luminaire failures. And I think our lighting industry really needs to get more wise about what we're seeing in what I call circularity. That's really the more accepted term beyond sustainability. So TM65 and TM66 address this about the longevity and circularity of an entire installed lighting system. If the driver fails, is it in a place that can be easily accessed and replaced? Is that driver still available to be replaced, since that's the likely first point of failure? If there are components within the luminaire that fail, can the components themselves be replaced, or do you have to rip out an entire luminaire, and what happens to it? It probably goes in the landfill. Plus, you got to patch a hole in the ceiling. This is the antithesis of sustainability. So our company is looking very, very much and significantly and challenging manufacturers more and more about the ways that they're thinking about circularity and durability of an installed system. Some are taking the approach of designing the most robust system ever, that they hope no one has to get into it. And so there isn't a modular component to be replaced because they don't want anyone replacing it. I think that's fine if you have incredibly low failure rates, but most of the middle ground in the lighting industry has way too many failures for that to be feasible. So we have to look very carefully. Again, we started out with we talked about L70, we talked about L90, and those are incredibly important. Please, as you are working with manufacturers or you're in your company, if you are a manufacturer, challenge them to tell you their story about circularity and how they are thinking about this, because it's no longer about the day one energy spend. It's about that whole system over its entire life cycle. And when some component does fail, how is it going to be replaced? All right. Few more things about sustainability, daylighting. I know we're in here talking about electric lighting, but the more that there's daylight, the better. If it is controlled for glare, we have to be, and for heat gain, we've got to have the right glazing systems for that. But letting daylighting be our ally is one of the keys to sustainability as well as wellness. So that helps us with our circadian adaptation. It helps with connections to nature. That helps with positive affect. So all of these things are a total win. And controls is, I know that there's a whole section on controls. Have you guys had the controls module yet?
Not
No.
yet, no.
Oh, okay. That's going to be so brilliant. It's so important. Thinking about luminaire design or lighting design is only half of the equation. We got to think about controls design. And in sustainability and in circadian lighting gestures, it doesn't matter what you do with the lighting if you don't have an equally defined, usable, and well executed lighting control strategy. So please, please, please pay all the attention to that and enjoy that one. All right, so we're going to just kind of recap on the visibility component here. We talked about all of these items. I know it's been a minute since where we started with tasks here today, but just a reminder to try and borrow a foot candle or illuminance meter and walk around with it vertical, horizontal, day, night, inside, outside, and just you'll be astonished at the wide range of light levels. Play with that mock-up with veiling reflections and glare, shooting a flashlight on a glossy surface, shoot it, play pool, angle of incidence equals angle of reflection, shoot it so that your angle of reflection is going to go into your eyes. It'll be a great object lesson on glare. See if you can get a login for the IES lighting library and go play around with the illuminant selector. And by the way, if you have the IES lighting library, you also have access to all of the RPs and LPs, recommended practices and lighting practices. And those things are really fantastic. So they'll give you a lot more information about all of these elements. We did talk about glare, adaptation, uniformity, luminance ratios. Are there any questions? I know that's a lot of stuff and you're probably just soaking it all in, but are there any questions on these components? All right, if one comes up, then feel free to lob it into the chat and we can come back and address it. Our total wrap up here, just rewinding back to last week when we talked about all of the design considerations and all of the elements of lighting, like the play of brilliance and focal glow and ambient illumination. And then we use lighting in all these different ways to create a sense of spaciousness, to create a sense of intimacy, to be pleasant. All of those things are hugely important. When we're thinking about lighting, we want to think about the overall environment, the people who are in it, and we always want to be able to tell a story with the lighting and have a narrative. So hopefully the elements in this module have helped you understand how to do that better, giving you a little bit more of a kit of parts to do that. So that's a wrap on the interior lighting module. Let's take a 5-minute break. It's 6:34. Let's come back here and we're going to start on the exterior module, crack at 6:40 p.m. All right. See you guys in 5 or 6. All right, everybody, 6:40. Welcome back. Can you guys hear me okay?
Loud and clear.
Awesome.
All clear.
All right. All right, did everybody stretch? If you didn't get up and stretch, if you've just been sitting in your chair multitasking, you got to get up and stretch. Otherwise, this isn't going to go well for us. So do yourself a favor, do me a favor, stand up and stretch. And if you are so inclined to turn on your camera and join us visually, that's greatly appreciated. All right, we're launching in to exterior lighting, and this one is lots of fun. So we'll keep it lively. There are all kinds of disclaimer slides here. I'm going to cruise through the continuing education. You guys know what you're doing. You know there are modules. So here we are. We're taking a look at our learning objectives. So let give you a second to read through those. All right. So digging in when we're thinking about, we've got a lot of different environments and considerations for exterior lighting, but we want to just start with the idea that that we're lighting in dark environments and everything that comes with that. So we will talk a lot about the ways we need to think differently about lighting in a dark environment. We're going to skip through this. Just, I know that you guys are going to be taking a look or have taken a look at this in other modules. And so for the sake of time, we're going to just kind of let that come and go very quickly. And also, we did look at this in our last module just a few minutes ago. So we know lighting quality is really at the heart of that Venn diagram. In dark exterior environments, and typically we're talking about these at night. Sometimes there are spaces where we do need lighting in the exterior during the day, like tunnels, but that's a bit of an exception. So we're going to take this more as broader ambient nighttime illumination. So one of the big challenges with exterior lighting is that unlike interior lighting, which is contained, exterior lighting is not. So there is no containment unless, again, we are in, for instance, a tunnel or something that has a sort of room to it. And there are spaces like that after dark, and some that are sort of semi-contained, like pergolas or spaces that have, semi-open slats. But we need to be super, super concerned about having just the right amount of lighting, and also being careful about how we are containing that within a property, or making sure that we don't create light spill. There are a lot of, so go back to the lighting library. There are a lot of TMs, or technical memorandums, and design guides. There's a recently introduced design guide about lighting for people in the environment after dark that came out in the last few years. And Nancy Clanton, who is just, she's sort of the fairy godmother of lighting, with an engineering focus. And she used to live in Boulder and started Clanton and Associates. She helped author that, and it is really well written. It's actually enjoyable to read, so I would highly recommend checking that out, and becoming more familiar with the guidelines for exterior lighting design. Of course, you'll get the intro tonight. When we think about lighting in exterior environments, we do have some conflicting needs. So just like in healthcare environments, I think healthcare environments are a really good example of conflicting needs, where even though we didn't talk about this specifically, your needs and wants for lighting as a patient are most likely very different to the needs and the wants of the medical staff and the caretakers, who most likely want brighter levels of light, where you probably want something that's more visually comfortable and softer. Similarly, at night, when we think about cars and motion, they are going to want more light, where we as humans, from a comfort standpoint, are going to want less overall light in that space. And so there are multiple perspectives we're trying to deal with, and we do have safety considerations here. So it's not just about visual preferences, we have to be very diligent about safety. all of the things that we've talked about in the interior environment are important in the exterior environment as well. So we do need to be considering things like pedestrian safety. We need to think about people who are driving vehicles. We've got to think about safety and security, as in minimizing unsafe environments at night. We also need to think about light trespass and light intrusion. So we do need to consider some additional things. And I will say that luminaire mounting and mounting height become tantamount in this environment because that really dictates how far your light travels. And it also affects visual comfort as well. When we look at light levels in calculations, generally in the exterior environments, we seek a little bit more uniformity. We want way lower light levels overall because it's exterior, and we have to be really careful about our maintained illuminance. So it's not just initial light output with a, like a 0.9 light loss factor or a 10% light loss factor. We need to think about the fact that there may be dirt accumulation on lenses, there may be bugs. So we do need to be more conservative with those light loss factors in an exterior environment. Who's been running has anybody been running calcs or doing design for an exterior environment? And if so, how have you treated your light loss factors in your calcs?
Sometimes I like it more because it's too bright.
When you say you like it more, as in you
Like I'll input a higher light loss factor.
Yeah, yes. Yeah, and certainly when we're dealing with entitlements, and we'll talk about regulatory processes, we'll touch on that just briefly here because it's a reality we all need to be aware of. There are caps on the amount of light that we can have in the exterior environment that are presented to authorities having jurisdiction. And depending on where you are, it might be 10-foot candles, it might be 8, it might be 5. And that can be tricky to cap those maxes and still get the uniformity and have the light where you want it. So all hugely important things as we're moving through. But let's start first with the visual piece. Let's talk first about the composition. Let's set aside the calculations component for a minute, and let's talk about the same thing that we talked about last week on the interior. We can look at ambient lighting, we can look at task lighting, we can look at accent. We use a little less sparkle in the exterior environment. There just are, I think, fewer opportunities for that, and it's a little less appropriate, but we can do some beautiful things with accent lighting. So what do you guys think about, if you think about if we think about Richard Kelly, and his ways of lighting, what are some of the opportunities that you see in the exterior environment to apply some of these different types of light? Ambient lighting is pretty easy, right? Like those could be ped poles, or if we're not talking about parking lots necessarily, but you could have kind of a uniform path of ambient light just to kind of get you from here to there using something that's a little bit taller, or even using bollards, right? What about task lighting? Where would you have a need for task lighting in an exterior environment?
Roadways.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point. So depending on what the roadway is and where it is, if it's for instance, a high speed interchange, then yes, there are going to be task lighting requirements about that. And could we call it ambient? Yeah. But it is also task because it's defining where some of those turns are. And to build onto that, one of the places where we most significantly want lighting, and I would call it task lighting, is where we have vehicles that are turning across a sidewalk or across a bike path. So like turning into a campus and there's a bike path that's running along the road. We have an area of high pedestrian vehicular conflict, and we want to make sure we have adequate illumination at that point of turning. Now, we don't need to light the whole road necessarily because they're headlights, but before the headlights catch up, that's a good spot. That's a good place for some task lighting. What about accent? How might we do accent lighting in the exterior environment at night?
I like when it's integrated into like canopies, like exterior canopies, and it just kind of looks like you can't see it. It's hidden in it. I think that's nice accent lighting.
Yeah, that's great. We also could, someone else was going to say something.
I was gonna say, you could also use it to like light footpaths or like one application I did was put it under a bench that's like surrounding a planter box and the floor around it like glows.
Yeah, those are all great examples. We could use the same strategy that we were looking at last week on the masonry. We can do that at the exterior. We can graze down or up or wash down or up building walls and highlight materials. Plant lighting, landscape lighting is also a great way to provide accent lighting. And by the way, that can actually serve as task lighting as well if those pools of light are pulling you along a path. So none of these things necessarily has it's not just a like one, it's one type of lighting and that's it. But just like on the interior, as we were talking about wanting to tell a story and have a narrative, we want to do the same thing at the exterior. And while we want to be far more conservative with our light in an exterior environment, we still want to think about those layers and think about the narrative, think about the hierarchy, think about the experience and the wayfinding. When we are considering light for the exterior environment, these distributions are essential. And while they're most associated with roadway, they are used for all kinds of distributions, including wall-mounted fixtures if you want to light a pathway a certain way. We use these, they're different type distributions for bollards and ped poles. They show up a lot. And so these are things that you just need to know these. Just commit and just decide you're going to dive in and play with them and get to know them really well. Running photometrics, if you like just want to iterate really quickly, like what does type 2 look like, type 3, type 4, type 5, and doing that and really just seeing like what that looks like, that's the best way to come to understand these. If you are not doing roadway lighting, you're not going to see these much at all. So don't stress about, oh my gosh, I can't find the four-way lighting. Those are kind of uncommon and much more specific to roadway. Type 1 is less common as well. That's for very, very narrow pedestrian path, like a narrow sidewalk or a narrow bike path. So that is the least common of the type 1 through 5 distributions. But type 5 is just a symmetric distribution, is sometimes called that. These are sometimes called asymmetric, but we prefer to be much more specific when we have fixtures that are doing much more significant tasks. So when we get into ped poles or area lighting, we really want to see type 2 through 5 distribution and not just symmetric asymmetric. It's not specific enough, and we need to really tune where those lumens are going. So just make sure that you get to know these and play around with them. And by the way, some manufacturers unfortunately have their own strange terminology that for some reason they've made up, which to me seems odd. So you have to read the footnotes of like, oh, that's equated to an IES type 4. Well, it would be helpful if you called it that, but don't be defeated if you're like, I don't know what that is. Read the footnotes, and if in doubt, you can ask the manufacturer. We talked about illuminance for the interior. We have the exact same considerations in the exterior environment. Horizontal illuminance really is the primary thing that we look at in exterior environments, right or wrong. Now, at a property line, especially if there is lead being considered, we do want to sort of think about that lighting. We want to think about the vertical illuminance throughout, but especially at a property line, understanding what you have vertically and not just horizontally is super important as well. But we do like to we do like to see uniformity in exterior environments like parking lots and roads. Uniformity is hugely important there. Vertical illuminance, while we're not necessarily doing a lot of sports fields, who can tell me one of the most, actually the single most important need for vertical illuminance in the nighttime environment? And I'll give you a hint, it has to do with safety. Have you ever been walking down the street and or walking on a sidewalk and there's like some glary light over there and that whole thing is really bright, but there's someone walking towards you and you can't see their face because the light it's like this glare bomb that's over there, but it's not actually illuminating their face. So that's a problem in the nighttime environment. We want enough vertical illumination in areas where there are safety considerations. It's not everywhere, but we want enough vertical illuminance that people can see faces. Now, that doesn't mean that we have to use ped poles or taller sources. If we have bollards and we have a natural concrete path, there's actually a fair amount of bounce illumination that can come from that does help with vertical illuminance. But we've got to be super duper careful about that. And I have a slide in here in a few slides where we can really start to take that apart. But that is the single biggest need for vertical illuminance across the board. Yes, if you're designing sports fields. Yes, if you want to help someone navigate to the entry of a building and you want to light the vertical face of the building so that it's almost like a billboard. Or yeah, you are lighting signage. Those are all important areas, but vertical illuminance for facial recognition is number one most important use of vertical illumination in the nighttime environment. Visual discomfort is a good word for it. That is an unfortunate feature of a lot of luminaires at night. And I'm working on a project right now where really love the engineer. I think it's easy at times to say, well, I'm going to put this 10,000 lumen fixture on the side of the building because I don't have anywhere convenient to mount a pole light. And I'm going to shoot that light into the parking lot. And now I've got great foot candle levels on the ground in this would have been this dark corner of the parking lot. And I had to say, respectfully, I think it's going to blind everybody. Let's talk with the landscape architect about adding a pole in that courtyard so that we can have more localized light and you can use something that's 3,000 lumens instead of 10,000 lumens. And by the way, it has a much sharper cutoff than that wall pack that was shooting at like a 45-degree angle into a parking lot. So we want to think about having that light directed. That's the example I just gave, where we want it to be directed and we want it to be directed down. So the higher the aiming angle of the light, the more visual discomfort we're going to have. We want it shielded. So instead of having drop lenses that have high luminance on the lens, like these guys have high luminance, this guy would have high luminance. This would have high luminance. This could potentially have high luminance on that lens. We want to tuck that light up and make sure that we don't have these glowing, bright orb type surfaces. And then we want to make sure that we're diffusing it properly so that we don't necessarily have really, really harsh, sharp, tight beams when we need a broader distribution. So we want to make sure that we're limiting the amount of light that's coming in the direction of the eye. That's really the most, that's really the most important component here. All right, who has a light at night horror story? Come on, I'm counting on you guys. Who's got an example of something that's just terrible? Like you're walking around your neighborhood and there's this thing that you see every time that you're walking your dog after dark. I see you, Liz, you probably are out walking your dog after dark. What have you noticed in the nighttime environment that you're like, this is just the worst? Why did they do this?
I feel like the only thing I really notice is just glare when I'm driving.
Yeah, that's actually a great example. And it's ubiquitous because headlights now are being made cooler and cooler color temperature. And of course, they're brighter. They're definitely brighter than they used to be. Do you know why them being a cooler color temperature is less comfortable? And this applies to all lighting at night. So this is an important takeaway here.
No, I don't know.
It has more blue in it.
Yes, and our eyes are more sensitive to that. After dark, it's perceived as brighter. So if you have the same incident amount of foot candles or the same luminance on a lens, if it is a cooler color temperature, again, it's a logarithmic relationship that the same foot candle level will be perceived as up to twice as bright in a much cooler color temperature than a warmer color temperature. And that can equate to visual discomfort at night and higher perceived glare. So that was actually a great example, Liz. I know you were digging deep there, but you nailed it. So way to go. All right, so luminaire mounting is super important as well. These are kind of funky and fun. You may love or not love the pattern, but we're not going to have a lot of visual discomfort from something that's this low. We're not going to have a lot of visual discomfort from something that's this warm, this diffuse, and this kind of low light level. We might, however, have a lot of visual discomfort from something like this, depending on the brightness and where that's aimed. Those are full cutoff fixtures because you can see this nice sharp rake here. But if you're approaching this, that might be somewhat uncomfortable. And certainly a pole light like this, you could actually just see the scatter that's captured in the photograph itself. Well, that's because there's some humidity in the in the environment when this photo was taken, but the mounting height is hugely important. And mounting height in the ground doesn't exempt you, because if that light has a really broad distribution and you're walking up to it and you get an eye full of LED, that can be uncomfortable. So we want to keep all of those things in mind. And mounting height in general, the lower the mounting height that we can use to achieve the purpose within reason and still maintain uniformity and distribution, the less we're going to see that spill light. The counterpoint to that is that we do have less uniformity on the ground, because the closer the source is to the ground, the more we have hot spot fall off. So it's always a balancing act. Please keep in mind that if you are designing lighting or running calcs or anything in outdoor environments, in many municipalities, there are actually regulatory guidelines that tell you the maximum allowable height for fixtures like parking lot lights. PED poles usually don't fall into that category, but parking lot lights and area lights, they're typically maxes that apply. And depending on where it is, for instance, in parts of Boulder, it's 25 feet. So you got to be careful about the height at which you're mounting things. Well, this is just a little bit of a preview, and hopefully you will be digging into this more in your controls module. But the controls for exterior lighting is something that has been a little bit of an all or nothing proposal in years past. These in the past were done largely with relays. It's like, okay, when the time clock says that it's dusk and this is supposed to turn on, the whole relay turns on, and all of those lights are powered. And it's really simple wiring to do that. Along the way, there have been photocells added. Some of those are fixture-based. This can get a little problematic if those are not functioning well. And if we want something that's more than the photocell says that the fixture should be on and the fixture should be off, and we want some level of control, like, yeah, maybe we want the photocell to turn the fixture on, but then we want it to dim, which most energy codes now require us to do, dimming after a certain time, or dimming if there's not occupancy sensed in a nighttime environment. So how do we introduce that level of control? Fixture-based occupancy sensors are certainly common, but when we get into things like landscape lighting or bollards, those are definitely less common. So the good news is that now Bluetooth mesh controls and wireless controls have extended our reach so that we can do more of the lighting control that we're accustomed to doing in the interior environment, in the exterior environment, as long as there's a direct line of sight from not visual sight, but comm from one fixture to another. And that's usually in the range of 150 to 200 feet. So you might have a fixture that is at the building, and it's communicating with the next fixture, communicating with the next fixture, the next fixture. So we do have more opportunities for control in the nighttime environment. And one thing just to be careful about is fixture-based occupancy sensing can create a really bad popcorn effect that feels very unsafe. Of like, we've all seen it in a parking garage where you walk out and you're like, hello, I'm here, would you turn on? And the first fixture turns on, and then you have to keep walking, and then the next fixture turns on. That's equally uncomfortable in the nighttime environment. So it's better to make sure that we've got banks of fixtures controlled as opposed to popcorning of one after another. But this will actually be a really good thing to, you'll hear more about this in the controls module. Time clocks are still a really, really common way to do this. Photocells, onboard aux sensors, those things are all being done. And I'm just excited about the fact that Bluetooth mesh and wireless controls have much more prevalence now and are giving us much greater ability to control things with lower cost in the nighttime environment. So far, so good. All right, is everybody awake? You guys with me? I know it's 7 o'clock, it's snowing. Hopefully everybody's awake. All right. So when we take a look at codes and we talk about those, we've chatted about that just a little bit. These are constantly changing and new codes are adopted in different jurisdictions all the time. And frankly, it's important to know if you're working on a project, if there is a specific code that is the target for design, the architect should be able to inform on that. It is not just energy codes that are important to consider. So I've mentioned some things about the regulatory environment and being aware of different municipalities' codes. Can anybody give me an example of that in Denver that affects exterior lighting? You guys are a shy crowd tonight. So I will tell you what it is. If you've heard the term SDP or site development plan, has anybody heard that? Have you heard about, conversations of, oh, we've got to redo the SDP, and it's the photometrics that are associated with the site overall. And if it's Westminster, it's the ODP. If it's Boulder, it's Tech Docs. It's pick your alphabet soup. Those are all terms for regulatory submissions that show photometrics on the property, on the site. And in Denver, there's a zoning code that has a pretty out of date, it's got pretty out of date terminology. I know that planning and zoning has been trying to update it. It's just it's a big deal to update that, and hopefully they are working on that, and there will be something new that's out in the next few years. But for now, the zoning code that's in play is what we have, and it dictates the way that the plans reviewers look at the SDP and those photometrics. Critically important to be aware of any lighting regulations or lighting codes that are in play in a jurisdiction. And that might not be the city, it might actually be the county. So in Denver, it's both the city and county of Denver. It's effectively one body. But in numerous places, you might ask, like, oh, well, does the city of Fairplay have, or I should say, does the city of Vail have lighting zoning or like some kind of lighting code? Nope. But if you look at Eagle County, they might. So you have to make sure that you're looking at both the municipality and the county to be aware of codes that would apply to lighting in the nighttime environment. Has anybody done SDP photometrics and submitted those? How did it go? Like, did you get feedback? Have you gotten comments? Like, what sort of feedback or comments did you get?
Honestly, it was all the comments were about the font. Like it had to be like the specific height and line weight of the font was the main thing I got. Like Denver, the only place I ever submitted one, never yelled at me for the light levels specifically, but the layout of them and how they look.
Yeah, I could make some comments on that, but what I will say instead is that Well, it's great that you didn't get comments on the lighting itself. Uniformity and limiting those top set light levels are the typical things that are most important to plans reviewers that are looking at things during the regulatory process. So all the more reason why having controls is hugely important, because we may have luminaires that deliver more light than is allowed, but if we're controlling them, the goal is to make sure that you have those at the lowest possible threshold. And so having the ability to control the lighting in the exterior environment also serves the purpose of what the cities and counties are wanting to achieve, which is less light pollution. So win for everybody. Thanks for sharing that example, Ian. I've been through some endless rounds, in working on some more innovative things, and I've had to really engage heavily with municipalities on that. So all of those things that we can end up doing ultimately, if we can be educated ourselves and educate those whose day-to-day role is not lighting, all the better. So kudos to you guys for being in this course, because this is sort of step one for being able to do that. So we've sort of set the ground now with lighting for dark environments. Now let's take a look at some of the applications where we have those considerations. So parks, campuses, university environments, that could be office campuses. What do you think would be the primary? What would be some of the goals that you would be considering for lighting in environments like are shown on these slides? What are some of the things you would be thinking about?
For sure, safety, right?
Absolutely. What else? We can use lighting for wayfinding. Like the example, this is University of Denver, and this corner illuminated stairwell, and we designed a custom pendant that drips all the way down through, and then there's this illuminated outdoor patio. That's on an axis with the most important alignment through the center of campus. And our goal in this, and it was shared by by actually I said, this is CCU. DU is not on this slide. This is Colorado Christian University, so I want to be accurate. The chancellor wanted to have that be a really visual beacon that you could see all the way from across campus. So wayfinding, right? So wayfinding is a big thing. What about a kind of a brand or identity? Like if you spent time at DU, you've seen the specific university cranberry colored poles that have the sort of acorn top on them, and they are a gesture that tells students you're on the DU campus. Yes, they deliver light, but they also are kind of a message that says, yes, you are here, you are on the DU campus. How about that? Could have architectural illumination. You could celebrate facades of buildings with, with restraint, but can celebrate the architecture. So there's some aesthetic purposes. Anything else you can think of that would be in your goals for lighting in these spaces? All right, well, let's take a look at a few ways that we can do that. So we can all think about pole mounted fixtures, right? We can all think about things that are mounted to walls. Catenary fixtures, there's actually more of a prevalence of those. And so I love that those are on here. They have been something that's done in Europe for more than like a festoon light kind of buy your 100-foot reel at Costco and string it up over your back patio kind of thing. I'm talking functional catenary lighting. So we can take the same sorts of distributions that we have typically seen out of pole-mounted fixtures, area lighting or ped poles, and introduce those in a catenary method, which can also really create a sense of place when it's done well. Other areas that we can illuminate lighting, I think, Ian, you mentioned having put some lighting under a bench. There are great ways to integrate lighting into lower site elements. And the nice thing about doing them when it's low is that we really minimize our concerns about glare, right? They're not gone away entirely, because if we're bouncing way too much light off of a really light colored surface, we are still going to get some glare. but we have a lot less likelihood of that than we do with, say, a pole mounted fixture. All right, let's talk about seeing like a pedestrian. So limiting glare is one of the most important factors in a successful outdoor lighting installation. And so we've got glare that can, there are several different kinds of glare. There's discomfort glare that is just like, that's uncomfortable in my eyes. Disability glare is actually where you end up with so much pupillary constriction that your eyes are taking in less light and you really can't see. You know, you're literally blinded. When someone says, "Oh my gosh, I'm blinded by that," it's no joke. That is disability glare. So we want to make sure that we are careful about the way that we're placing light so that we are making sure we're not creating too much glare. By the way, humid environments where we end up having this sort of diffuse ball of light can be very atmospheric and beautiful. When it turns into moisture that's on the ground, we end up doubling our concern about glare because we now have a reflective surface on the ground. So that's a really important thing to consider if you're in an environment that has a lot of moisture and a lot of rain. Do think about any luminaires that you are placing, what they're going to look like when they're reflected off of a wet road, a wet sidewalk. All right. So pedestrians are moving at a slower speed. And we're certainly thinking about safety. We're thinking about people who are coming our way. Can we see them? Vertical illuminance is important. But when we think about being a pedestrian, I would say that seeing the horizontal surface is important. Seeing vertical, going back to that first slide, is equally important because we want to have good facial recognition. So thinking about your time out and about as a pedestrian, what are some of the things that have been problematic for you? And by a corollary, what are some of the things that you think would help that in the nighttime environment?
Their distribution for sure.
Absolutely. Distribution, there are plenty of inappropriate distributions. And appropriate distribution, like these luminaires, they are not emitting light above 90 degrees. So you can see that the cone of light is down. That's great. In this, though, let me ask you about this. Do you feel like the illumination from these poles is distributed where it needs to be, or would you do something different?
I would do something different.
What would you do? What would you do differently?
I would make it actually in a way that instead of just measuring the just lighting where the man is standing, it will light also the inside so that you can see like on the inside. Yeah.
It's a little muffled, so I think we got some of that. But I would limit the backlight. There's a lot of backlight into the vegetation, which is some backlight is nice, so you know that there's not someone who's just crouching in these bushes, but that's an awful lot of light that's just being cast backwards into the park, which might as well remain a little bit more dark and focus that light a little bit more on the roadway here. So I would tighten that up, and instead of having this, I would have this. That's what I would do differently here. One of my big pet peeves in the nighttime environment is sources that have a significant amount of glare, where again, it's that whole idea of, oh, we're putting a ton of effective light on the ground, but we are blinded by what's in the field of vision. So there's actually an interesting relationship when that luminaire is kind of in the middle of our range of vision. So from like 8 feet to 12-ish feet, we actually are more sensitive to that because it's within our typical cone of vision. If it's a little bit higher, so by the time that we're approaching 16 feet up to 20 feet, it's a little bit more removed from our field of vision. And so it can actually be less impactful when it's slightly higher. So that's just something to think about if you've got to deliver a lot of light. I love this slide. So I want to ask you guys, this is a little bit less of the the kind of task lighting from ped poles. There's a lot going on here. So first of all, just take it in for a second, and then let's break this down. All right, so who can give me some examples if we go back to the idea of task lighting, ambient lighting, accent lighting, sparkle, perimeter lighting? Give me some examples of this. We have all kinds of examples we can pull from here. So shout out what you're seeing and how would you categorize it?
The way the lights hit the trees kind of make them sparkle, you know, just like a little bit of hints of extra bright green, like the glare off them is, I don't know, kind of used to make them shine.
I love that. That's actually that's a really fun observation. All right, what else are you guys seeing?
I see some task light right under the bridges where like the white I mean they stare kind of stare. So I see some task light there.
Princess, it's a little muffled again. We really want to hear what you're saying. It's just a tad muffled, just so you know. But I think we were saying that there's some task lighting here. And by the way, there are these poles that are you have to look pretty carefully, but here's the base of the pole. So this is task and ambient lighting, kind of lighting up this whole walkway here. So we have a few more layers here. Who wants to call out another layer?
I think the wall would be accent lighting along, yeah, that kind of like walk along that walkway.
Mm-hmm. And perimeter lighting as well. And that does a nice job of defining the space. And we're going to talk about what purpose that serves in just a moment. There's one other really important layer here. Who wants to shout it out?
Oh, it's kind of hard to see, but I think I know what you're getting at. I'm gonna let someone else do it.
Brittany, I see you're unmuted. What you got?
Oh, I was gonna say the perimeter lighting.
Yeah. Okay. But you know what? There's also we could talk about the signage lighting that we want to talk about high luminance. That's high luminance right there. Do you see the sign lighting here? You guys see where my mouse is? So that's not directly in the space, but it is in the field of vision. So that's an important one. How about this foreground landscape lighting? I mean, I know that there's the tree up lighting. This is kind of another element that's here. So what do you think? Is this like love it, love all the light here? Does it feel like it's missing something and there should be more light, or does it feel like maybe it's one or two elements too many? What do you guys think of the visual composition here?
Feels too much to me.
And there is a high popular density, right? Pedestrian density, so uh, maybe it's enough.
Okay, maybe it's enough. All right. Anybody else have a vote here? You want to weigh in? Well, I would say one of the most successful things in my mind, there are a couple things that are super successful. This lighting here serves a huge purpose of defining the space, and you can see people really well, in part because of the way that they're silhouetted in front of that wall and still illuminated by it. So that creates a sense of safety. When we see the edge of the space, whether it's light on that or we have light kind of on the ground, understanding the boundaries of the space that we're in helps us feel safe. We don't need light in the whole center of a space. Having the edges lit is the number one key gesture for safety when you're in an environment like this. The uplighting on plants, yes, we need to be careful about environmental considerations, and hopefully tree uplighting and plant uplighting is off as of midnight. Plants need dark too, plants need sleep too, but that actually also gives vertical illuminance, right? So we have these elements that are lit that are in the vertical plane. And so the things that are the most kind of create the sense of space, help us feel safe, are all about the vertical illuminance. I would argue that the pole mounted downlighting is actually too much. And that some of this may just be the photo balance. This is a little over bright. I would say there could be a lot less of this overhead lighting. Look at the brightness on these steps. Like, gosh, oh, there are these lights here. These are really hard to see. Do you see that there's a little bollard here with a head that's shooting down? Do you guys see that? Yeah, I always forget about these. So that's fine. Those are actually helping to provide some definition here, maybe one more element than is needed. I would say that all of the stuff in the middle is maybe a little bit more than is necessary. So balancing all of those layers is hugely important, and thinking about the visual composition and how our eyes perceive it is huge. So this wall, I would say, is the number one ally in that space feeling comfortable and well lit, with the trees being the second behind that. All right, that was fun. Moving on, let's talk briefly about something a little more technical, which has to do with bug ratings. Who knows what bug stands for in the world of lighting?
It's like light pollution, right? I believe having to do with light pollution.
It most certainly does.
I don't know what the acronym stands for.
Okay, no worries. It stands for backlight, uplight, glare. And so luminaires do have published bug ratings when they're used in the outdoor environment. And you can also pull those out of Photometric Toolbox, I think, and out of AGI as well. So bug ratings are really, I mean, this is pretty much the uplight is the B, the backlight is the B, and uplight is the U, backlight is the B, and the G stands for the glare that's actually at the luminaire itself. That's not represented in the diagram. Bug ratings are used when we are pursuing LEED credits. If we are looking at the light pollution reduction credit in LEED, there are limits on the B, the U, and the G, depending on the lighting zone. Are you guys familiar with lighting zones for exterior lighting? If not, we're going to talk about those super briefly. Okay, we're going to talk about it really briefly. I actually don't think that's on a future slide here. If it is, then we'll cruise right over it. Lighting zones are, and they're called LZ1 through 4. The LZ1 is basically like or LZ0 actually is like a national park, dark sky kind of setting. And LZ4 is Times Square. So it's a designation of how much light is expected and appropriate in that environment. Most of the kinds of things that we would be working on in, if we're designing lighting for, say, an office building or for a hotel or the airport or something like that, we're going to be somewhere in the LZ 2 to 3 setting for most of those things. And for each of those, and this shows up in all of the IES design guidelines, DGs, and RPs, recommended practices for outdoor lighting at night. There are definitions of what are the types of buildings that fall into each lighting zone. That alone is not enough. You have to consider the context. Is it urban? Is it suburban? Is it exurban? And with that, you come up with your own discretionary decision about, is it LZ2, LZ3? It's unlikely to be LZ4. It's unlikely to be LZ0. And with that, then for LEED guidelines, there are limits. Let's say it's LZ3. There are limits on how much backlight, how much uplight, and how much glare. What those bug ratings are, they range from 0 to, I believe, 2 for each of those. You may be allowed backlight of 1. If you're within a certain distance of the property line in LZ2, you're allowed a certain amount of glare. You may be allowed glare 1, you may be allowed glare 2, and you're allowed a certain amount of uplight. So those ratings are really important to know. And those become part of the submission if you're pursuing light pollution reduction for LEED. But more importantly, they just help you understand, like, dude, am I choosing a fixture that has a really high glare rating? Maybe I should choose something else, because this is actually an environment where we want to be visually conservative. And that is Sustainable Sites Credit 6, light pollution reduction. So I would recommend looking through finding the lighting zones. There are a lot of publications where you can look those up and see those excerpted. It's an important thing to know and be able to speak about lucidly. All right. Here's my big question for you. What is the single most important consideration in doing the lighting in this parking lot? Single most important consideration in terms of your lighting statistics. Single most important. And I'll give you a clue. I'm not looking for like light level. I'm not looking for, we want to, get 2-foot candles. What is the metric that is most important?
Uniformity.
Yes, it's uniformity. That is correct. So this actually, you can see here, we've got 10-foot candles under this pole, and we're over here at, 1.3, sort of in this area. We're at 1, we're at 0.5, we're at 0.2. We have, we're not super great on our uniformity because of the fall off over here in the way that this is designed. Now, this is just an example. But there are limits. So if we go back to, we're going to go back and take a look at our lighting library. Let's just do this for a second. We're going to go back to, let's look at parking. All parking lots. Let's see. That is not exactly what I wanted to do. Here we go. We'll just go to parking lots and garages. Parking lots. All right. Let's do this again. All right, so all parking lots. Here is where our uniformity ratio falls. So 20:1 max to min. So if we go back to, this and we can see we're at 0.1 over here and we're at 10, that's actually a 100:1, right? So if it was 1-foot candle min, 10-foot candles max, it would be a 10:1 max to min. We're 100:1. Now, this again is kind of a fake it. This is missing a pole over here, but the uniformity is most critical. And many people would strive to have more like a 10:1 max to min in a parking lot and consider that more successful. So uniformity is hugely important when we're designing parking lots and places where we want to kind of have that, where we want to have this feeling of just a sort of safe blanket of light. Now, keep in mind that when we've got parking lot full of cars, there are different shadows that occur. And parking garages are another area where uniformity is hugely important. Can you give me, who can think of a spot where we could actually navigate the outdoor environment pretty well without high levels of uniformity and that blanket of light? Do you have any ideas on that? So I stayed at this beautiful resort in Western Colorado, Gateway Canyons. Highly recommend going there if you ever have the chance. And it is in this, where multiple different rivers, bodies of water meet. It's very strange. It's this, and it was a very sacred place to indigenous people there. And there's now a hotel on that on this property, and it's beautiful. And they have super low light levels, and it's a huge site. And they have the teeniest little landscape lights that just cast this little pool of light down that maybe under that light you get 3-foot candles, maybe. And then it's like a fall off. It's probably a 6-foot diameter pool of light tops, and even smaller, probably more like 4. And then it's total darkness. But then they have another one. And you can walk that whole site and you just navigate pool of light to pool of light. And you have a sense of where you're going. And it's absolutely delightful. So the idea that we have to have spaces continuously lit, we want to be thoughtful about that. And yeah, in a parking lot, we do want good illumination for sure. But on walkways, especially if it's lower density use and we don't have a lot of significant safety considerations, just remember we can navigate pool of light to pool of light. Just need to know where we're going. So we can think about light as a directional cue of like just a beacon. It's a lighthouse. We can think about light that way. We don't have to have a uniform blanket of light everywhere. I want to offer that counterpoint to this. All right, I hope everybody recognizes this slide. I have to tell you, did take an illuminance meter out to the mall and measured the amount of light out there. And this was after walking around a good amount of downtown with the illuminance meter, where we were lucky if we were getting 1 foot candle on average. Can you guess what the light level is at the ground on the mall with our UFO light fixtures here? Have you guys been out there after dark? Any guesses on the fruit candles?
Mm,
2.
2. Okay, we got a guess for 2. What else?
say over 10.
Yeah,
25.
it ranges from like 11 to 15. It's unreal. And when your eye is adapted to, like, even 1 foot candle at night is a decent amount. Remember, full moon, 0.02 foot candles. This is over 10 foot candles. It's great when you're there and you're adapted to it. And when you come into it from not being adapted to it, it's utterly shocking. That said, it is well distributed. It is controlled for glare. It does have this interesting the little UFO ring was a holdover from what used to be a feature of those, the original design, and was kept as kind of this moment of sparkle, right? There's our sparkle in the exterior environment. So I think the design was executed really well, maybe just at a slightly higher volume than I might like. But if we compare that with this image on the left, I mean, we have all kinds of problems with the image on the left, don't we? Like, we probably don't have 10-foot candles over here, but what do we have? We got a boatload of glare. So now we've blinded people with this luminaire. And imagine if there was someone here walking towards you in the shadow of those trees where this light is not penetrating. You've got this light that's blinding you, and there's someone walking towards you. You have no idea if that is an assailant carrying a knife walking straight towards you. No idea at all. So this is the problem with glare in the nighttime environment. What's nice about this is that the light is very distributed and controlled. There are light elements that are very well shielded. There's a little bit of sparkle here, and you can see on the ground that it is pretty uniform, and there's a good amount of vertical illuminance, which in this setting contributes to the perception of safety, and that's a huge win. So if I had my druthers, I would just dim everything a little bit, but the environment here is very well designed. And by the way, that teeny bit of uplight that's coming up from the uplight is creating that canopy of lighting in the trees. So again, contributing to the feeling of safety. All right, streets and roadways. We've talked a little bit about this. One thing I want to mention about this is that we have to think about speed. And speed, when we're moving at more rapidly, we want to make sure that we have luminaires that are up higher to be able to create uniform illumination so that we don't have strobing effect. If we think about passing, have you ever gone through a tunnel where there's a light and then a gap and then a light and a gap, and it feels like strobing is going on? Have you guys experienced that? It's pretty unnerving. So we want to avoid that. Higher luminaire mounting locations. That's why roadway lighting is mounted so high. So for freeways, have you ever seen one of those lights that is being maintained, or has, worse yet, has fallen over? It's extraordinary how long they are. We're talking 100 feet up in the air. They're so tall. Because when we're traveling at speed, we want uniform distribution from a higher mounting height. This I might not recommend though. I think that we could all talk about what's wrong with this particular instance here. We've probably not too enjoyable if you happen to live up at this level. But at least it is higher lighting for the roadway. I would argue that it doesn't need to be that high when you've got buildings this close. Is anybody working on roadway lighting at all? Kind of a unique niche. So we did talk about seeing like a pedestrian. What's different? What's different if you are seeing like an automobile, if you're a driver? What's different than if you're a pedestrian? We might say it's really the speed, right? So the speed of travel means that that our response times are going to be reduced. And so if something's happening, we've got to be able to react quickly. So all the more important to keep glare at a minimum. And when we talk about task lighting, remember that example of a car, headlights don't turn. So a car that's turning across a sidewalk, or for instance, pulling into a parking garage and there's a sidewalk, making sure that you have illumination at that point is super important. So glare is a huge consideration for vehicles. So roadway lighting, the thing that we want to do is really produce quick, uniform, accurate illumination. We do not want any drama. We do not want any visual effects. This is all about safety. No excitement in roadway lighting. So uniformity is king here. We could say that there's some visual composition even when we're looking at something that is the scale of this. So this is a little bit larger than the prior image that we dissected. What do you guys see in terms of the visual composition here? What do you think were some of the primary goals? And do you think that those were executed successfully? What do you like? What do you not like?
The sidewalks seem like pretty uniformly lit. Like I feel like you can see all the way down them, like if while you were walking around one of them. Decent level of light on the roadway and on the crosswalk. Probably could be better on that close crosswalk, but the other one seems pretty lit.
Do you think that there were any missed opportunities here? Places where you would add light?
Yeah, I don't love that like corner that's closest to us. It just feels kind of dark compared to how bright it is on the opposite side.
Yeah, it sort of looks like maybe this building, it's after hours and they had controls that turn the lights off. I do like the fact that there is some uplighting on these palm trees here. It doesn't look like there's uplighting on this side. I feel like some of the facades could use, there would be a really beautiful emphasis there, but we have a lot of spill light through the windows from retail. So when you have that much spill light from retail, adding facade lighting can almost be too much. This is an interesting moment up here, albeit very poorly executed with outdated metal halide technology. But this is, I think, a good example of an activated shopping district where you still have, I mean, that's 4 lanes of traffic. So that's a lot of pedestrians and traffic going on. It feels like it's reasonably executed, if a bit bright, I would say. Well, looking again back at our typed distributions, just a reminder about some of those. So remember that this is one of the homework assignments to make sure that that you're learning these. And on that last slide, if we look at these fixtures here, these guys are probably doing a type 3, just looking at the head. You don't usually use a type 2 for something that's mounted this high, but that actually would have been a nice way to make sure that just the roadway is illuminated. These guys are doing a little bit of these are just blobs of light. There certainly is no distribution from those ped poles, I assure you, when you have that kind of an acorn. All right, just to recap on illuminance versus luminance, the good news is that we did cover this on interior lighting. So remember, illuminance is the light that is landing on the surface. So it's what you would measure in foot candles or lux. Luminance is the brightness of a source, whether it's the lens where you're seeing the lamp, or it's a bright window, or it's a skylight. We're measuring that in luminance. So visual comfort, we've talked some about this. All right, so which one of these would you say has a higher visual comfort? And do you think that one has better visual comfort for pedestrians, one has better visual comfort for drivers, or would you say that it's the same? So I'm looking at this, and in this image on the left, we've got what I lovingly and affectionately and very technically call a glare bomb. So even though there's more incident light here on the roadway, it comes at a huge cost of having this amount of glare that is actually going to reduce visibility. So here we have something that has much greater cutoff and is focused on, here's our area of high pedestrian vehicular conflict. We're not really worried about having a ton of lighting in the roadway here because cars have headlights, right? And if a pedestrian is choosing to jaywalk across a busy roadway, not at a crosswalk, that sort of sounds like bad decision making and not something that has to be solved by lighting designers or lighting manufacturers. So this is actually just focusing the light where we need it, and we have less glare and more visual comfort of creating. There's actually a benefit to creating that brighter spot where we've got the darker roadway. It also, even without it being a lot of light, draws attention to, ooh, something's happening up there. There's light. What's happening? So people are going to notice it more and pay closer attention. So we have a dual benefit. So that was my opinion. Did anybody have a strong feeling about, you think one is more comfortable than the other? I'm happy if you want to like jump in and give a differing opinion. No, okay, no differing opinions. I get it. We're close to closing time. This is one of the slides I was waiting for. So this, I'm just going to give you a second to just take in each of these images, because the pictures tell the whole story. This is why when people want to just mount fixtures that sort of shoot somewhere and say, oh, that's lighting for safety. That's exactly what was done in both of these instances. And how safe was that? How safe is it? Far better to have something that's controlled. And you know what? Frankly, if there were some downlights in this soffit, for instance, as a counterpoint, that just raked down this bright white surface and bounced a little bit of light, you'd see all of this much, much better than by having this big blob of light. Likewise, if this had a much more protected cone of light that was bouncing off of this concrete surface, we would have much, much more meaningful vertical illuminance for facial recognition, which, remember, is our number one consideration for safety in the nighttime environment. These pictures, by the way, I've used in multiple presentations. They do a really good job of telling the story. All right, we've talked some about parking lots, so we're going to move really quickly through this. We'll wrap up right at 8. So fear not, we're close to the finish line. I know you guys are. It makes for long days doing this a couple times a week. So I applaud you for your dedication. So parking lot, I've said this several times. I'm going to say it again. So just because the photometrics look uniform doesn't mean it's a good lighting solution. We have to consider glare. So we love uniformity in parking lots, and we have to consider glare. And then when we think about parking lots, and this is important for that vertical luminance, we want to be about 5 feet above grade in considering how much light we have. That's around face level. So super, super important. And consider shadowing between vehicles when working on parking lot lighting. Garages, by the way, took an interesting series of pictures in Beaver Creek while there for a job site visit. And one level was just raw concrete, and another level had the exact same solution, and it was painted white. And we took a ton of pictures, and everybody thought that the lighting was totally different. Everybody thought it was something was totally different about the garage. All that was different was the white paint. We got a lot more bounce light, a lot more volume of light. And in parking garages, as much as it's important for us to be really careful and considerate about the glare from luminaires, actually understanding if there is any paint finish on surfaces or it's just raw concrete is equally important. We talked about the parking garage entries and that transient adaptation. Remember, we want the light, the bright light during the day to take us from up to 10,000 foot candles down to our about 5 in the parking garage. And at night, we want the opposite. We want those transient adaptation fixtures in that 50 feet to be more like 2 to 3 foot candles to bridge us from maybe 1 foot candle outside, maybe if there's a lot of street lighting, to our 5 foot candles interior. So that comes back to controls. Athletic facilities. What I will say about this, have you gone through any of the discussions about visibility and contrast? That's come up. Okay, awesome. So for lighting athletic facilities, one of the biggest things to consider, in addition to color, light levels, of course, color temperature, we want high CRI. We want to be able to have the color of whatever the ball or whatever the athletic device is, we want that to be really accurately rendered. So we do want good CRI, and generally cooler color temperature works better for athletic facilities. We get more crispness and we get a little bit more of that sort of daytime visibility. So one of the few places in the nighttime environment where you would hear me advocating for cooler color temperature. Glare is hugely important, and light trespass. Boy, sports lighting, it kind of comes with the territory that there is going to be light trespass, but quite a specialty, making sure that we've got good coverage, and we want to make sure that we've got broad uniformity without gaps. We don't want bright, dark, because a ball moving at speed across that is going to look like it's strobing. So we have to make sure that we've got uniformity. All right, facades and landscape. We're cruising along, guys. Almost there. So such a wonderful way to create a nighttime environment. We can light the exterior environment using largely facade and landscape if we want. If we have something that's more hospitality focused and we want lower light levels. So what kind of environmental concerns would you call out around doing facade and landscape lighting? What sorts of things do we want to be thinking about?
Dark sky?
Absolutely, Brittany. Excuse me. Yes, whether we're uplighting a facade, we're uplighting trees, dark sky is indeed a consideration. And we can solve that by making sure that we're capturing as much of the beam as possible on, for instance, the vertical surface of a facade, so the right beam angle and the right aiming. What else? What other environmental considerations do we have? How about light trespass? We want to be careful about that. So light that's shedding across a property line or going into windows, especially near houses or dorms or apartments, we need to be really careful there. And also, again, trees and plants need sleep too. They need darkness. So if we are choosing to illuminate landscape, best practice is to make sure that we are controlling that light off by midnight so that the plants have a chance to have some darkness as well. And controls, hugely important. So when we're working on buildings, lighting, it's usually quite a bit easier to control lights that are on buildings than lights that are just on the site. So we want to make sure that we're doing that. lights like this, we could really benefit from dimming those. They do help with wayfinding. We do have lighting requirements. We have code requirements, not recommendations. We have code requirements on stairs. So we want to make sure that we're considering all of that. And we don't want to do the every other off kind of thing to reduce light levels. We have so many controls available to us now. I think that there are very limited applications where it's acceptable to say, well, we're going to leave that light on full bright and that one is off, because we've created an artificial early end of life for half of our lighting system. We don't want to do that. It's easy enough for us to be able to dim everything. So we should be doing that. And if we need to pop everything back on for emergency reasons, then we can do that as well. That does help conserve energy too. So that's a good thing. Visual composition, I don't want to spend too much time here, but I think just enjoying this. One thing that I do want to point out is that this is interesting in this reflecting pool, how much you see this luminaire that's tucked under this cap. So again, that idea of context, just like I was talking about, if it's a rainy environment or a wet environment where there might be a lot of water on the road or the sidewalk, same thing if we're dealing with bodies of water, we want to think about if they're still, what we're going to see reflected in those. Thankfully, this is not a sync like a bunch of, pixelated diode view here. That would be kind of unpleasant, but that concept of perimeter lighting as well, there's very little lighting that's in this area, but the whole perimeter is illuminated and you just get that sense of context, which is one of the most beautiful ways to do lighting at night. So this is really talking about distributions. We've dissected this slide. We've got up lights here. We've got up and down lights here that are captured in this overhang. Some up lights that are peeking through this pergola. We have up lights here. We've got up lighting in the fountain and a lot of up lighting here along the fence. So keeping in mind that luminaire distributions at night, uplight is a tremendously powerful way of lighting. And especially if we don't have a ceiling, it kind of limits what we're able to do. We want to be really careful with the way that we're doing uplight. So we minimize light trespass and just shooting a bunch of light up into the sky. All right. Who can give me the example of where are we seeing illuminance in this and where are we seeing luminance? Illuminance, luminance.
So luminance in those what look like white rectangles, are those actual lights?
These up here?
Yeah.
I think those are mechanical screens. I think they're or they're screening something up here. It's some sort of a screen. So that I would, because those aren't light fixtures, I would call those illuminance, that there's light landing on those. I think that there is a ribbon of light here that's shining onto those.
Okay.
But these lenses here are where we would measure luminance. We'd also measure it here where we've got that bright cove light. And illuminance, we would say, well, we can measure the light on this ground. That's where there's some distributed light. And this actually is a spot where we would measure illuminance as well. This is a bit of a confusing image because I think this is a bit ambiguous of what's happening here. So I can totally understand the answer. So there's a role that each of those plays in the visual composition. I think overall, there's a lot going on here. And there's a lot of socket shadow happening, and we've got some lights we've got some lamps that are at, I think have been recently replaced, and these I think are fluorescent. Those have been recently replaced or relamped, and these are near end of life. That's really near end of life. So the luminance and illuminance, the brightness of the sources, and then the softness, this all leads to a specific visual composition. And those are the kinds of things we want to be thinking about when we're considering exterior lighting. All right, we're going to keep moving because I know we're almost out of time. Visual comfort, the last one thing I want to say here is that high luminance from these exposed lamps in this setting definitely does not help with visual comfort. This would be a spot where having those be a little more diffuse would really help. That's a nice way to achieve it here, though. We don't have any exposed bright sources, so it just kind of glows. Lastly, sustainability and wellness. This is a fabulous, fabulous slide. The International Dark Sky Association has categorized these 5 principles for responsible outdoor lighting. And actually, there is upcoming, I believe it's April 21st, there's a talk that the IES is doing. It is a noon virtual talk that is specifically on dark sky. It's for International Dark Sky Week that's going to address these in more detail. And I would highly encourage you to attend that if you can. These things are really, really important. We want to make sure that we have light that is targeted. We want to make sure it's useful. We want to have that light be as low of a level as possible. Our eyes, remember, 0.02 foot candles, full moon. Please remember that from this talk today, from this module. 0.02 foot candles. So when people are talking about 2 foot candles being a moderate light level, remember that is 100x the full moon. We've lost sight of that. So we need to come back to that lower baseline of light at night, and we can control it. And by the way, the warmer it is, generally the more friendly it is biologically, and the less it looks super bright to our eyes. Sky glow is a problem. This map, by the way, is out of date. This map is from, I think, like around 2000. It's a lot worse now, which is frightening. We want to be really, really cautious about light trespass. And by the way, areas with lower incomes actually are statistically much higher, there's a much higher likelihood of light trespass. So there's a little bit of a consideration around lighting equity that I know that that's not really something that I think there's a shift in the political environment where there's less conversation about that, but responsible lighting, there's actually an undue burden on those at a lower income level. There's a lot more light trespass adjacent to neighborhoods that are at a lower income level. So give that a little bit of thought. And then, of course, we've talked some about circadian lighting and biology, but we also want to think about wellness in terms of perceived safety. Here's the, gosh, can't see who's coming toward us. So safe environments at night don't require a lot of light. They just require light that's well placed, that's well considered, that's well distributed. All right, now we're at our wrap up. So we've talked about so many things. I know this was a sprint, you guys, since we had a little bit of interior lighting that was left over. We all have so much to say. We all have so much that we want to teach, so much that we want to share. But we did talk about some of the conflicting values, and we talked about some of those hugely important considerations around visual comfort, uniformity, managing glare, talking about visual composition and the ways that we can do lighting at night and still have it be a design goal, design exercise. It doesn't just have to be about safety, unless it's roadway lighting, in which case, yes, it's just about safety. We did talk about codes. Remember that you want to be familiar with the codes that are applicable in any given municipality, and that might not be a city, it might be a county, it might be both. So don't just rely on the IECC or ASHRAE in terms of energy code. Make sure that you understand lighting zoning and zoning codes that might apply. And then for luminaires, we discussed bug ratings. So bug ratings, I want you to study those and get to understand, be familiar with what those are and how those relate to lumen outputs and distributions. And we certainly talked about the IES classifications of type 1 through 5. Get to know those. Please play with those in photometrics. Repeating the 5 principles for responsible outdoor lighting. Hugely important. Hugely important. And with that, that is a wrap on Module 9, Lighting for Exterior Applications. I know we're 4 minutes over. If you guys need to hop off, then I welcome you to hop off, and no issue there. If anybody has questions, you're welcome to stay on, and I'm happy to chat with you for any questions or follow-up that you have. And Brian is back. And Brian, did you have anything you wanted to say to us here?
I was just going to post that link for the Dark Sky event in the chat. So if you hang on a minute,
Great.
you will see that. But that's all for me. Next session is next Tuesday.
All right. Well, please feel free to hop off. I want to say thank you to everybody. I won't see you hear from, that's a wrap on what I'm instructing. If there's anything that we talked about tonight that you want more information or you want to talk a little bit further, please feel free to reach out and connect with me. I'm happy to chat, engage, share resources. I appreciate all of you being here. I know it makes for a long evening. I appreciate those of you who have been engaged. I appreciate all of you being here, and everything that you learn about lighting and taking your passion for lighting and illumination makes the world a better place. So thank you all for being here.
Thank you, Lisa.
Thank you,
Thanks,
Lisa.
Thanks, everyone.
Of course, my
Thanks,
pleasure.
Lisa.
Have a good night.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Good
Brian.
night.
Oh.